Is the New York Times pushing for war or intervention in Venezuela? Before I actually get into that, I'm going to take you back almost 2 decades now to the eve of the Iraq War. I've had many bones to pick with the New York Times over the past 2 years. Its track record, of course, regarding Gaza has been abysmal. It in itself is this rag sheet that is hypocritical in its message of trying to advance perhaps a Democrat liberal view of things, and yet if you pick up the paper, or for those of you who have foolishly subscribed to it, you will see that while pursuing a avowed Zionist agenda, its outlook on the world is almost, I would say, neoconservative. I'm sure, of course, there are many sort of journalism scholars and sort of critics who would maybe disagree with me or agree with me, but I mean, sort of, let us go back to the allusion I was making at first, the one on the eve, as I said, of the Iraq War. In the run-up, of course, I mean, shortly after 9/11, the Bush administration and the neocons who sort of peopled his entire cabinet were pushing for, again, I mean, sort of dusting off that war with Iraq, of sort of taking out Saddam Hussein, who was, again, a bad apple in the Middle East, who apparently had connections to Al-Qaeda. So followed was that every outlet in America, every news media outlet, part and parcel, took what the White House was feeding them and regurgitated it to make a case that intervening in Iraq was the right thing to do. That besides, of course, going sort of into Afghanistan and trying to sort of hunt down Osama bin Laden, that taking out Saddam Hussein too was sort of like, justified in light of course, what happened during the first Gulf War, the Iran-Iraq War, what Saddam did with the Kurds, so on and so forth. I mean, there was just a lot of history there which they used to justify. And of course, it was the WMDs. In particular, you may remember, and this is very famously, I mean, sort of this lady's name will go down in history for this. It was a Judith Miller article. Not just that one, I mean, sort of the New York Times published so many, but they were able, I mean, her article was again making that case for the existence, sort of that red herring of WMDs in Iraq. And of course, here we are now, 22 years later, having seen the aftermath of the war on terror and the lives in the Middle East, Iraqis, Syrians, Americans, that it so claimed. Now, of course, this was the New York Times that sort of published this, and almost a year to that date, I think it was later on in 2004, there was an op-ed. Of course, this was from the editorial team, and in which, of course, they, weapons of mass destruction or distraction was, I think, the article and how they put it. It wasn't a mea culpa. I don't think that it was sort of a sort of an apology to the millions, the hundreds of thousands, well, I think it was almost 1 million Iraqis who would later on perish, of course, in that war. But it was something. It was something of an admittance. It was something of an admittal that, yes, we done wrong. We perhaps should have been wiser. We should have exercised more editorial when it came to what the White House was feeding us. And yet we have this same rag sheet going out of its way now. And this is, of course, thanks to an article from someone I particularly hate, Stephen Brett, a Zionist, who again, I think in the past, I think this was last week or about 10 days ago, in which he published an article, again, advocating for military intervention in Venezuela. I I mean, we've seen what the Trump administration has been doing, because the thing is that we have seen of late that a case is somehow being made to designate Venezuela as sort of a narco-terrorist state, as a state that is fueling the narcotics trade with America, and sort of in response, the US government has taken to striking in international waters, these boats of very spurious, provenance. We do not know if they're fishing boats or if they're actually carrying drugs, but they've gotten to striking them. We've seen Nobel Prize winner, Miss Machado, making the case, these bizarre claims that somehow Hamas and Hezbollah are sort of actively involved in Venezuela, and they are somehow a part of the government infrastructure. I mean, sort of these wild claims for a woman who wants to sort of sell her country's riches to the highest bidder, of course, in this case, the US, Venezuela's oil wealth, and of course, other mineral resources. I don't know if the American public is, or even the rest of the world is willing to buy an argument now for America to intervene militarily in Venezuela. Where then does the New York Times get off from trying to make a case for such an intervention? This is a question, of course, for Stephen Brett to answer, his article notwithstanding. But for someone like Trump, who is trying, at least in his second term, to appear as this great peacemaker, having made peace, he sort of goes around as if he has a resume almost of all of the wars he's stopped in the past year. And of course, we know that, he was instrumental in stopping the war between India and Pakistan, Thailand and Cambodia. He, of course, has, for whatever it's worth, regardless of the Trump, the peace plan itself, which of course you can watch here on the page. My colleague has commented on that. He did ensure a ceasefire in Gaza. And of course, now they're working on Russia and Ukraine. So for someone like that, who is maybe, I guess, sort of wants that peace prize, but instead gave it to Ms. Machado, military intervention in Venezuela is decidedly off-brand. For the New York Times, it isn't. It is a paper that, under the guise of its long history and esteem, is always, we know exactly the kind of reporting that they've done throughout the Gaza genocide. We know exactly who they are. And that veneer of respectability that they've had must at least compel, has completely, the wool has been completely removed from our eyes. Nobody can, in their right minds, take this paper seriously. History has proven it to us. What they did in 2003, 2002, beating the drums of war for Iraq, they're now somehow trying to drum up for Venezuela. Don't buy into it.
The revolution will be live.